So, welcome to today's webinar. As I said, it's called Using ColorCards Apps in Aphasia Therapy. My name's Rebecca and I'm going to run through the webinar with you today. But before I start, one thing I want to tell you about is a special offer that ColorCards have made available just for 24 hours for the webinar, and that is that you can buy any of the 5 ColorCards apps for just $1.99 or £1.49. So I will remind you of that at the end as well, but please take advantage and download one of the apps. Great. So the plan for today is to have a bit of an overview of the ColorCards apps, but bearing in mind that the majority of you aren't using them, we'll go into that into as much detail as possible. We're then going to look at how the apps can be used for both expressive and receptive language goals. And these are just a few ways to illustrate how the apps can be used. And I'm sure as you see the apps in action, you'll have ideas and suggestions of your own. And then finally, we're going to look at the reporting and tracking feature that sits within the apps, particularly from the angle of how these apps can support your clients to work independently on goals, because I think that's one of the real benefits of the ColorCards apps. So there are 5 apps in the range, as I said, and if you're at all familiar with the ColorCards traditional boxes and you've got them in your therapy bag or on your shelf or in the boot of your car, you'll be familiar with these titles, and they're now available as apps. So there are 5 apps, the first being Everyday Objects, then you've got What Can You See, and then a series of 3 apps within the sequencing range, ranging from basic sequences up to 6- and 8-step sequences. So they're the 5 apps available in the range. And one of the things to bear in mind in terms of the apps is that they've been designed for therapists. They can equally be used by families and patients themselves. They've been designed for therapists in mind because there's a caseload tool, so you can have multiple clients using the apps. You can store their progress and then come back and review that the next time. And they're also designed to be used with therapists. So we certainly have lots of features built in where we would hope that therapists would intervene and ask questions or explore content and tasks that are used within the apps. And nicely, they can be used in conjunction with the ColorCards box set. So if you've already got those, you can use the apps as well. One of the really great things about the ColorCards apps is that they take the box set a step further by allowing you to add your own content. And I think when you're thinking about people with aphasia, one of the real benefits in my experience is that by having content that of the person's own objects or own environment, is that personal relevance that I think aids in both comprehension but perhaps expressive language as well. It also means you can create content for each client that you have, so that it's personally relevant, but also that it's age appropriate, culturally appropriate, and targeting content that meets your goals. So you can make it as simple or as difficult as you want, and you really can adjust the content quite easily. I think it also makes it a little more fun and engaging. Of course, it's nicer to look at your own personal photos probably than the stock standard photos, and potentially makes the therapy tasks more transferable. So lots of reasons why the apps really add value, in my opinion, in terms of being able to personalize and customize the content. I'm going to show you how to do that as we go along, but just to give you an overview, the way that you can personalize it is by taking photos to add to or instead of the photos that come in the standard photo library. So you can take photos and then use them in the sequencing tasks, or use them in everyday objects, or what can you see. So you can either take photos that you use with the iPad, or you can import photos if you have images perhaps that a family member's taken that they want to upload. You can do that. You can take screen grabs on your iPad and use those. So you can access pictures from, I don't know, pictures of a local restaurant, or pictures from the local park, for example, that are available online that you can reuse in the app. And another way that you can personalize and customize the app is that there is a recording feature. So you're able to record the patient, or indeed your own narration for each of the tasks. Again, I'm going to go into a lot more detail to show you how that's possible. Okay, so if we were thinking about how we might use the ColorCards apps for working on receptive language goals, let's start with thinking about the sequencing apps which you saw. You saw basic sequencing, but the same approach works for both of the other two sequencing apps, which are a little more complex. So, I mean, these might be fairly obvious, but the suggestions I have are working on visual sequencing, working on following instructions, but also working on temporal concepts in terms of ordering a familiar sequence in order. It might be, for example, a personal care sequence, brushing your teeth, might be something like making a cup of tea, or it might be something more complex and abstract. So you can use sequencing apps nicely for receptive goals. With everyday objects, you also have access to a picture deck which you can flick through, and I think a nice task would be to have the client flick through and find the object that you've described. So I might be find me the teacup, and the client flicks through until they find what it is that you were asking for. But you can also use the individual pictures one by one. For example, point to the handle, point to the spout. So working on identifying the components within that object itself. If we were to think about what can you see, which is similar to everyday objects, you can work on understanding yes or no questions. So for example, excuse me for a minute. Excuse me. Work on understanding yes or no questions. So I could ask, is the object made of metal? Is the object red? And so on, where the client only needs to answer yes or no. But I could also work on very, very simple goals or skills. So just following the instruction of next and working on that page flip skill that you saw. Okay, so thinking about using the apps for expressive language goals, if I was looking at the sequencing apps, I think the obvious one that you would all think of as well was working on verbal sequencing. And I think the nice feature in the app is the recording and listening back that you can do, which I think is nice for working on self-evaluation as well. Working on sentence building, so working on all those, the use of, adding in the content words, or use of all the little words. Working on verbal problem solving, verbal prediction skills, narrative skills. I think there's lots you can do with the sequencing apps, which if you have the box sets, you probably know. Everyday objects, I think the options are working on naming, working on narrative description skills, and working on some of the compensatory things like circumlocution. The nice thing in comparison to, for example, using the box set is that you can create your own content. What can you see? You can work on similar things, working on describing the components of an item, especially as they're being revealed piece by piece. That's a nice option. So I think there's lots of ways you can do it. I thought I'd give you a couple of more specific examples to perhaps illustrate how the apps can be used.
So now I'm going to show you how the apps work in action. As I mentioned, there are the 5 apps. We're going to go through how sequencing and everyday objects can be used. Let's start with sequencing, which is loading now. With basic sequences, you have 4 different tasks that you can choose from: ordering, predicting, describing, and the ability to flick through the card deck to view all of the different sequences. They're all available within this app. This is the card deck. So as you can see, I'm just scrolling through the different sequences that come with the app, or if you customize the content, you'd also be able to see that in this section. So this is nice for receptive goals, for example, finding particular pictures. Right, so let's explore some of the tasks that are available. I'm going to go into ordering. You can see here I have 3 pictures, in this case of a boy making a bed, and the client is tasked with moving the pictures into the correct order. So I can move them about on the screen and put them in the right order, and then that will tell me whether I'm right or wrong. But I also have the option of marking down the side whether it's correct, correct with help, or incorrect. One of the nice things about the app is that I can also hear the instruction aloud to put the cards in the correct order, or just have that written across the bottom like you can see now. So as you can see, I've moved them into the right order, and I've got some nice visual feedback to confirm that for me. And when the therapist is happy, or the client themselves, if they're working on the app independently, then they can tap on the tick mark on the top to indicate that they were correct. Here's another example. In this case, I can ask the client to move the cards into the correct order, so they're able to work on visual sequencing in this case, or they may be following your instructions as to what to do, and again they receive that nice visual feedback to confirm that their choice was correct. And here's another example. Now, if you felt, or the client didn't agree with the app's suggestion of what was correct, you can also still mark it as correct on the app. And I think this is one of the nice things that sometimes happens in therapy, where you have that opportunity to discuss the rationale for their decision making, or a different way of thinking. So, for example, this one might be that the woman put all the flowers into the vase and then decided that she didn't like how they were arranged, and she arranged them again. So you can decide with the client what's correct or incorrect as well. Sometimes overriding the app will be a good option for you. Of the lady putting the picture on the wall. I'll draw your attention to a couple of other things that are on the screen. So you can see the microphone in the top right hand corner, which allows your client to record their response, and then you can listen to that back. You have the counter in the bottom left hand corner, which gives you an idea of how many cards you've done so far and the progress towards finishing that. With each task, you're able to adjust how many cards or sets the client will go through in each session, and you can adjust that at the beginning of a session as well. Last example, so I could have my client move them into place, and then if I was working on expressive language goals, you may have them describe what's happening, or you might be working on sentence structure and so on. Oh, it wasn't the last one. Here's the last one again, so the client moves them into the order that they think is correct. Oops, there we go. And once they're correct, we can indicate and tick that as well. So you can decide how many tasks you have in a game. It can be 1, you could have as many as you want. It's limitless. And then you're able to see the results following that task as well. So you can see there, you get the panel of the different options. So that was the ordering task. I'm going to show you the settings. This is where you set up the content that you want to use in the app. You saw that we had 6 different sequences, so here I can manage which ones I want to use from the library available with the app, or indeed where I can add new sequences myself if I want to add images or my own sequences. And you can take those, use your camera on your iPad, or you can take screenshots. You've got quite a number of ways that you can personalize the app. Okay, so we're back to the main screen, and this time I'm going to show you predicting, which I think works nicely on working on verbal prediction skills, as a nice task where you can see the same picture again of the boy making the bed, but this time you don't see the whole sequence and have to reorder it. You're asked to predict what happens next. So here you see this picture, and you can have the client say, well, I think the boy's going to put the pillow on the bed, and I'm going to record that. Press the record button, then I stop, and then I can play that back and hear their response, which I think is fantastic for things like self-monitoring and self-evaluation, and great for when the client's working on the app independently. I can then progress through the cards one by one, and one of the nice things about this app is you have the 4th mystery card, or if in the case of the larger sequencing apps where you have 6 and up to 8 step sequences, you've got the mystery card where you can talk about what happens after the sequence ends. So nice for working on a whole range of more complex verbal skills. So again, you have the prerogative to decide whether they're correct with help, or incorrect. So that's how predicting works. And again, you get the visual reinforcement once you've completed a task, and you can see that goes on, and you can choose which pictures you want to have in there. Let's come out of that now, and we're going to move into everyday objects. Now, if you have the box set in your therapy kit, you'll be familiar with a lot of the content that's in here, but the real bonus is that you can add your own images, so you can take photos and add those in as well. Here we are in View Deck, and you can see some of the pictures that are available. I think a nice receptive goal would be to say, find the hairdryer, for example, and the client has to flick through until they see that. But let's go into looking at the describing game. Here, in this case, I haven't used an image from the photo library. I've taken one myself of a mug on my desk, and so I can do lots of things here. As you would know if you're familiar with the ColorCard cards themselves, you can do a whole lot of things. The app's been designed to be just as flexible. So I can have the client name the object, I can have the client describe it, gesture about it, write about it, you name it, you can do it. So again, you have the option, just as you did in sequencing, to indicate whether the client was correct or incorrect. Here is another example where I've taken an image from my desk, so I can have pictures that are personal and relevant to my client that are included in the app. So there you go again. So in this task we just had 2 pictures. I can make it as simple as I want, or I could have 20, 25 images that I load up for sessions with my client. Right, so here we are back on the home page. You can see you can also personalize it by adding your photo, and I'm going to show you how you can personalize some of the content within the game. So I go into the game setup, and there you can see the cup that we had earlier, for example, in easy, and you can see the different items that are in there. If I want to add a new item, I can either capture that from the device's camera, oops, there goes my iPad turning upside down, or I can use the photo library. In this case, I'm going to take a photo of my marker, good, we're the right way around again, and decide which level of difficulty to assign this image to. I'm going to assign it to easy, and then type in the name of the object. And then you can see here it is sitting in the easy category alongside the cup that I made previously. So really simple to add your own content. So you can either take photos or add images. It really is easy. So if I want to then choose the marker and into the content for my next activity, I can do that. If I want to take out the plunger, I can do that. And then come back into the games. And let's go into reveal this time. Now, in this task, you tap on the screen to reveal the image bit by bit. Here's the cup that we saw before. We flick that over, and then once the client can identify it, they can say that aloud, and we can record it, and we can indicate whether that's right with help, or incorrect. Also nice for working on describing components of an object and some of the compensatory strategies for word finding difficulties is nicely possible with this task, I think. Great, so you saw how we can personalize content. While we're here, I'm actually going to show you how the results work. We're going to go into the results for Kasha. Just come out of the game. Okay, back into settings, and then I go down to reports. I can choose the reports for Kasha, so you can see you can have a whole caseload there, and I can see how she did on the 2 different sessions that she had, and if she's not having the sessions with her therapist, the therapist can come back and review those with her. I can see how many she got correct with help, how many correct independently, and the percentage that were incorrect as well in that bottom right pie chart, the total number of cards she's used, and the time spent. You'll see in the top right under her name there's a large text entry box, so you can make notes and annotate that for each client. You can also drill down and see each of the tasks that the client's completed. So here's the one we just did. We can see how Kasha did with naming the mug and the plunger, how long she took for that particular task. So it's great. You can see progress over time, but you can also review how somebody did with individual tasks or on individual days. So that's really nice in terms of monitoring progress. And because it's consistent across the apps, that really, in my opinion, makes it a little easier for therapists, but also for clients, because it's very familiar as well. Okay, great. So we're back into the presentation, and here's a couple of specific examples similar to what we've just talked about. So being able to record somebody's spoken narrative for a sequencing task using the microphone and the play button. So this is valid for the sequencing app, including basic sequences 6 and 8 step, and sequences 4 step. So they're all available in the current range. One of the nice tasks I like to do involves semantic feature analysis. So you might prepare a handout or even write it on a piece of paper in a session and have the client work on describing the semantic features of each object. So what color is it? What is it made of? What do you use it for? Where do you find it? What shape is it, etc. And you can record those while you're using the app. So that's nice with what can you see. It's also nice with everyday objects, either with the content that's pre-built with the app or pictures that you wanted to import and use yourself or take with the iPad. So I think this is one of the nice examples of using the app. We talked a little bit about how the app nicely supports somebody going away and doing practice on their own. And I think most of our clients are keen to do this if they have their own iPad, of course. So in this way, the client can be set up with tasks by the therapist, from setting up the content, taking the photos, deciding how many tasks to do, etc. So the therapist really still is helping the client decide on content and the nature of the task. The client can do those and then either share those results back to the therapist between sessions, or indeed when the therapist next visits or the next session, they can review those together. So, and then of course make adjustments for the next block of independent practice between sessions. So for me, I think that's a really motivating way for clients to use the apps to promote independent practice, and because of the consistency between the apps makes it viable for clients to work on a number of apps without being overwhelmed as to how to go about doing those. So I think that's one of the benefits, in my opinion, of using the apps. So we can measure progress against our goals, and you can see accuracy and also those observations that you can record in the reports section, just in that free text section, and we also have the ability to review the audio that was taken within the app. You saw how each of the apps have that consistent reporting tool, which I think makes sense when you're trying to use that across a caseload of patients. So I can personalize and annotate each of those patients' notes on my iPad by setting up a new user ID for each of them, and I can switch between them. So I think that certainly makes sense, and is certainly an efficiency in terms of using it. And finally, before we finish, just wanted to signpost you to some great resources that are available on the ColorCards website, and to take the opportunity to thank you for attending. And we look forward to answering any questions.